We begin not at the start of a 10-year war, but in its final, blood-soaked hours. The greatest warrior the world has ever known sits weeping, his face stained with dirt and tears, sharing a sorrowful moment with the man whose son he has brutally slaughtered. This is the heart of Homer's The Iliad, an epic that is not about gods or glory, but about the terrifying, destructive, and ultimately humanizing power of wrath. For 3,000 years, this poem has stood as the foundation of Western thought, challenging us to confront the true cost of honor, the fragility of life, and the complex relationship between fate and human passion. We think of the Trojan War as a grand saga of heroes and gods, but Homer gives us something far more intimate, a profound, concentrated study of what happens when a single man's pride explodes into cosmic fury. The action focuses on just 50 days in the 10th year of the Siege of Troy, but within those few weeks lies the entire tragic scope of the human condition. The very first word of the Iliad is mutildita, uyatavar sigma dollar, Menin, wrath. This is not ordinary anger, but a profound, almost divine rage, a force of nature that threatens to shatter the established order of the world. It is the fury of Achilles, and it is this single, consuming emotion that drives every pivot, every death, and every moral challenge within the epic. It asks us, can such intense passion ever be controlled? And if it cannot, what is the necessary price for its resolution? The Iliad is an anatomy of this rage, tracing its path from a petty insult to a murderous rampage and ultimately to a moment of grace. We will unpack the essential plot following Achilles' devastating arc, but more importantly, we will dissect the philosophical weight of the poem, the meaning of honor, time, the desperation for immortal fame, Kleos, and the ultimate struggle for human connection in a world governed by arbitrary gods. Prepare to delve into the depths of a masterpiece that still defines our understanding of heroism, tragedy, and empathy. To understand the epic, we must first recognize the society that birthed it. The Iliad is the product of centuries of oral performance, crystallized into written form perhaps around the 8th century before the Common Era, traditionally by the singular genius of Homer. He took the existing myths of the Bronze Age, the legendary conflict at Troy, and shaped them into a cohesive narrative that became the foundational text for Greek education and culture. The world Homer describes is one driven by an aristocratic warrior code. Status is everything. A man's worth is measured by his time, honor, or value, a tangible public recognition that comes in the form of war prizes, giras, public acclaim, and material wealth. To have one's time violated is to be publicly shamed, stripped of one's identity and value, an unforgivable act in this fiercely competitive society. This setting is crucial, for it immediately explains the central conflict. The Achaeans, or Greeks, led by Agamemnon, king of Mycenae, have besieged the mighty city of Troy, or Ilion, for 9 long years, seeking retribution for the abduction of Helen by the Trojan prince Paris. By the time the Iliad begins, the warriors are exhausted, demoralized, and hypersensitive to the distribution of rewards. The central figures are, of course, the supreme leader Agamemnon, whose authority is often driven by pride and self-interest, and Achilles, the finest fighter in the Greek army, a semi-divine hero whose destiny is to live a short, glorious life. This predetermined fate means Achilles fights not for survival, but for Kleos' undying fame, the only form of immortality available to mortals. This context sets the stage for disaster. Imagine the scene: 10,000 soldiers camped by the sea, facing impenetrable walls, fueled only by pride and the promise of eventual glory. When a crisis of leadership strikes, the entire expedition risks collapse, not because of a powerful enemy attack, but because of a failure of internal moral structure. This sets the immediate, desperate tone for the narrative, placing the focus squarely on human character flaws rather than mere military strategy. Before plunging into the plot, we must consider the literary genesis of the work. The Iliad was crafted through an oral tradition, meant to be heard and performed over multiple days. This explains its use of formulaic epithets: swift-footed Achilles, ox-eyed Hera, Hector, breaker of horses, which provided the bards, rhapsodes with rhythmic, repeatable phrases necessary for memorization and composition in the moment. These epithets also reinforce the singular, defining trait of each hero, making their identities monumental. Homer's narrative structure is masterfully tight. The entire epic spans only 53 days, beginning in medias res in the middle of things. The story assumes the audience knows the history: Paris's abduction of Helen, the sacrifice of Iphigenia, and the 9 years of fighting. By focusing on a mere slice of the war, Homer maximizes the dramatic tension, ensuring every major event is magnified by the knowledge that this conflict is rapidly nearing its catastrophic end. The Trojans, the defenders, are led by Hector, the noblest figure in the poem, whose heroism is motivated by profound duty owes to his city, his wife Andromache, and his son Astyanax. He is the complete man, balancing martial prowess with deep familial responsibility, standing in stark contrast to Achilles' self-centered, almost animalistic genius. Hector fights for survival, Achilles fights for fame. This duality forms the ethical heart of the epic. The divine world in the Iliad is equally complex. The Olympian gods are not detached philosophical entities, but anthropomorphic aristocrats driven by petty feuds, jealousy, and favoritism. Hera and Athena fiercely support the Greeks, still angry over Paris's judgment against them, while Apollo and Aphrodite protect the Trojans. Zeus, the chief god, is bound by fate, Moira, but attempts to maintain a chaotic order, often manipulating mortals as pawns in their celestial games. The poem is not simply myth. It is a repository of shared cultural memory, a moral textbook for ancient Greeks. It taught them the ultimate cost of hubris, excessive pride, the necessity of Xenia-guest friendship violated by Paris, and the fundamental importance of ritual, especially the proper treatment of the dead, which becomes central to the final resolution. The Iliad thus functions as a powerful mirror, reflecting both the glory and the inherent tragedy of human striving. The very structure of the poem is defined by the narrative device of ring composition, where the ending intentionally mirrors the beginning, often inverting the theme to provide resolution. The Iliad opens with a plea for a captive woman that is rejected by Agamemnon, sparking the wrath. It concludes with a plea for a dead body that is accepted by Achilles, resolving the wrath. This structural symmetry is Homer's profound argument for the human capacity to move from destructive rage to shared compassion. The narrative begins with a plague afflicting the Achaean camp sent by the god Apollo. This divine punishment is provoked because Agamemnon, the high commander, has dishonored Chryses, a priest of Apollo, by refusing to ransom his daughter Chryses, whom Agamemnon keeps as a war prize. Achilles, the most outspoken and moral of the Achaean leaders, summons the prophet Calchas, who confirms that the plague will only cease if Chryses is returned immediately without ransom. Agamemnon is forced to comply, but his pride is wounded. His authority, his time as supreme commander, has been publicly challenged and undermined by a junior commander, Achilles. In a fit of hubris, Agamemnon exacts revenge by seizing Achilles' own captive, Briseis. This act is a monumental public humiliation, robbing Achilles of the tangible symbol of his excellence. He feels his entire worth has been negated by his commander. In this highly formalized society, reputation is everything, and Achilles feels he has been reduced to nothing. Achilles immediately withdraws his myrmidons from the war, vowing never to fight again until Agamemnon suffers grievous losses and comes crawling back to restore his honor. He appeals to his mother, the sea nymph Thetis, who in turn petitions Zeus to manipulate the war's outcome in favor of the Trojans. Zeus, owing a debt to Thetis, reluctantly agrees, setting the stage for the Greek disaster. The ensuing books depict the disastrous consequence of Achilles' rage. Without their greatest fighter, the Achaean army falters. Zeus sends a deceptive dream to Agamemnon, urging him to attack, which leads to major engagements where the Greeks, despite the heroism of figures like Diomedes and Odysseus, are relentlessly pushed back. The fighting becomes desperate. Heroes are wounded, including Odysseus, Agamemnon, and Diomedes, forcing the commanders to huddle injured in the camp. The Trojans, led by the indomitable Hector, break through the Greek defenses, threatening to burn the ships the Greeks' only means of escape and homecoming, Nostos. Seeing the devastation, the Achaean leaders realize their critical error. In Book 9, Agamemnon sends an embassy to Achilles, composed of the wisest generals Odysseus, Ajax, and Achilles' former mentor Phoenix. Agamemnon offers vast treasure, 7 captured cities, and the return of Briseis untouched. Achilles delivers one of the most famous speeches in Western literature. He fiercely rejects the offer. He argues that Agamemnon's gifts, though vast, cannot compensate for the public insult to his time. He questions the entire heroic code. Why should he fight and risk his life when the man who fights the least, Agamemnon, gets the greatest share? He knows his destiny, a short life with Kleos, but he rebels against the system that allows such injustice. His refusal seals the Greeks' fate and tragically his own. With the Trojans closing in, Achilles remains stubbornly withdrawn. His only sign of compromise is to allow his closest and dearest companion, Patroclus, to wear his own divine armor. Achilles strictly warns Patroclus to drive the Trojans away from the ships, but under no circumstances to pursue them toward the walls of Troy. Patroclus, fueled by the rage of battle and the desperation of the Greeks, disregards the warning. He pushes the Trojans all the way back, even managing to kill Sarpedon, the son of Zeus. This moment of fleeting, borrowed glory is his Aristeia. But his success is immediately followed by tragedy. At the walls of Troy, Patroclus is first stunned and disarmed by Apollo, then wounded by the minor Trojan hero Euphorbus, and finally Hector delivers the killing blow. As he dies, Patroclus prophesies Hector's own imminent death at the hands of Achilles. Hector, triumphant, strips the divine armor from Patroclus's body, taking the symbol of Achilles' time as his own trophy. The news of Patroclus's death shatters Achilles. His initial rage against Agamemnon, fueled by pride, is immediately eclipsed by a profound, agonizing grief and an absolute thirst for vengeance against Hector. This is the great turning point of the Iliad. Achilles' rage is redirected from self-pity to an overwhelming, necessary duty to his fallen comrade. His mother, Thetis, witnesses his grief. She cannot save her son from his own fated death, but she can ensure his return to battle. She commissions Hephaestus, the divine craftsman, to forge magnificent new armor for Achilles. In Book 18, we receive the famous ekphrasis, the detailed description of Achilles' shield. This is not just a piece of armor, it is a microcosm of the entire human world. It depicts two cities, one at peace showing weddings, feasts, and judicial proceedings, the other at war facing siege. It displays scenes of agriculture, harvest, dancing youths, and the boundless sea. The shield serves a profound philosophical purpose. It shows the world Achilles is fighting for the civilization, the ritual, the continuity of life, and the world he loses by committing himself wholly to the path of vengeance. It reminds the audience, and perhaps Achilles himself, that his glorious, destructive path exists within a fragile framework of human order. Achilles reconciles swiftly with Agamemnon, accepting the gifts and the return of Briseis, though these matters now seem utterly trivial. His focus is singular: Hector must die. The hero returns to the battlefield not as the best of the Achaeans, but as a terrifying, almost inhuman force of nature, driven by the desire to avenge his friend. The battle scenes that follow are some of the most visceral and gruesome in literature. Achilles achieves his terrifying Aristeia, slaughtering Trojans indiscriminately. His rage is so immense it overflows into the natural world. He fights the river god Scamander, who swells in response to the thousands of corpses choking its waters, creating chaos that requires divine intervention from Hephaestus. The culmination arrives in Book 22. Hector, knowing his time is up but unwilling to face the shame Ados of hiding behind the walls, waits outside the Scaean gates. He is momentarily tempted to flee, but fate and the will of the gods dictate his choice. Zeus weighs the fates of the two heroes on his golden scales, and Hector's side immediately sinks, confirming his doom. Athena, disguised as Hector's brother Deiphobus, tricks Hector into believing he has an ally, ensuring he faces Achilles in single combat. The duel is swift, tragic, and decisive. Achilles plunges his spear into Hector's throat, the one vulnerable spot in the armor stripped from Patroclus. In his dying breath, Hector begs Achilles to return his body to Troy for proper burial. Achilles' response is savagely cold: "Dogs and birds will eat your body raw." Driven by unending grief, Achilles commits the ultimate sacrilege against the heroic code. He ties Hector's body by the heels to his chariot and drags the corpse around Patroclus's tomb for 12 consecutive days. This act reveals the profound corruption wrought by his wrath. He has crossed the line from honorable killer to dishonorable mutilator. This profound desecration offends both gods and mortals. Apollo, the protector of the dead, intervenes to preserve the body from further mutilation. Zeus, recognizing that the wrath must finally end, sends Iris to compel Achilles to accept a ransom for the corpse, and he sends Hermes to guide Priam, Hector's aged father, into the Greek camp. Book 24, the final book, is perhaps the most profound moment in the epic. King Priam, cloaked and guided by Hermes, slips past the sentries and enters Achilles' tent at night. He kneels before the killer of his son, grasping Achilles' knees and kissing the terrible hands that murdered Hector. Priam appeals not to Achilles the warrior, but to Achilles the son. He asks Achilles to remember his own father, Peleus, who is now aged and vulnerable, awaiting the inevitable news of his son's death. This is the moment Achilles' wrath finally breaks. The shared human experience of loss, the universal grief of a father for a son, overwhelms the demands of vengeance. Achilles weeps first for Patroclus, then for his own father, and finally perhaps for Priam, recognizing their shared inevitable mortality. He accepts the immense ransom, orders Hector's body cleaned and prepared, and returns it to Priam, granting a 12-day truce for the funeral rites. The Iliad concludes not with the triumphant fall of Troy, which would be covered in later narratives, or the death of Achilles, but with the solemn funeral of Hector. This intentional ending shifts the focus entirely from martial glory to the dignity of human ritual, emphasizing the shared grief and the ultimate tragedy of the entire conflict. The structural trajectory of the Iliad is defined by the transformation of Achilles' wrath, Menes, into compassion, Ilios, or Philotes. His initial anger is petulant, self-serving, and isolates him from the community. It is a rage born of injured pride times. The death of Patroclus purifies this rage, turning it into a devastating but single-minded drive for revenge, which temporarily restores his connection to the heroic code. However, it is the final act, the negotiation with Priam, that completes the moral journey. Achilles moves beyond the demands of Kleos and the cycle of vengeance. He sees his own reflection, his own destined sorrow in Priam's tears. This shared recognition of mortality and grief is the ultimate correction to the blinding force of Menes. It shows that the capacity for empathy is the true measure of a hero, surpassing physical prowess or glory. The second defining theme is the eternal conflict between glory, Kleos, and mortality. Heroes in the Iliad are hyper-aware that their lives are brief and fleeting. The only way to achieve permanence is through undying fame, ensuring their names live on through epic poetry. This necessity drives their extreme behavior. Achilles embodies this tension perfectly. When he rejects the embassy in Book 9, he consciously debates the two paths offered by his mother Thetis, a long, inglorious life or a short, glorious one. His eventual decision to return to battle is a deliberate choice for Kleos, accepting his fate and his impending death, which Hector had chillingly prophesied. Conversely, Hector represents the tragic hero caught between the demands of Kleos and the deep, human obligation of civic duty. His famous scene with Andromache shows him torn between fighting for eternal fame and staying with his family. He chooses to fight not primarily for personal renown, but because he fears the shame, Eidos, of shirking his duty to the city he is sworn to protect. He is a tragic figure precisely because his motives are purely noble, and yet he is doomed by fate. The third critical theme involves the complex presence of divine intervention and human agency. The Olympian gods are constantly, visibly, and often arbitrarily involved. They are plot mechanisms, manipulating battles with ease. Apollo guides arrows, Athena gives strength, Zeus holds the scale of fate. This raises the critical philosophical question: if the gods dictate events, how much free will do mortals truly possess? Homer suggests that while the broad strokes of fate, Moira, are fixed, the quality of human response remains the sole locus of moral freedom. Achilles chooses his short, glorious life. Hector chooses to confront Achilles outside the walls. Agamemnon chooses to seize Briseis out of pride. The gods may set the parameters, but the heroes choose the depth of their suffering, the intensity of their passions, and the manner of their death. It is in this profound human choice that the epic finds its enduring power. The gods themselves are often portrayed as deeply flawed, petty, and driven by jealousy. They manipulate events like children playing with toys, reflecting the unpredictable and often cruel nature of external forces. This divine chaos contrasts sharply with the deep, enduring pathos of the mortals, their love, their grief, and their dignity in the face of death. Human passion is intense precisely because it is fleeting, giving it a weight and meaning the eternal gods can never truly experience. Homer's technique amplifies this duality through the frequent use of the Homeric simile. These extended comparisons temporarily pull the reader away from the battlefield and into the everyday world of the poet's audience. A lion attacking a flock, reapers harvesting wheat, a storm descending on the sea. These similes serve two powerful purposes. First, they ground the superhuman actions of the heroes in familiar, natural terms, making their prowess comprehensible. Second, and most profoundly, they emphasize the terrible cost of the violence. A simile comparing a dying warrior to a tree being felled reminds the audience of the domestic life, the peace, and the natural order that the war is violently disrupting, amplifying the tragedy. The Iliad is fundamentally a tragedy, but it is one that offers a profound meditation on the potential for good within destruction. The poem reveals that the ultimate heroic virtue is not strength by or cunning medes, but the capacity for empathy and shared humanity. This lesson is found in the simple, heartbreaking exchange in Book 24, where the cycle of hatred is broken by a mutual recognition of loss. The intense focus on honor and Kleos makes the Iliad perpetually relevant, for it captures the essence of status, rivalry, and consequence in any high-stakes environment. Consider the initial conflict between Achilles and Agamemnon. This power struggle perfectly illustrates how leadership ego and pride can shatter an entire organization. Agamemnon's priority was not winning the war, but maintaining his supreme status time against any perceived threat, even his best warrior. His failure to compromise nearly led to the annihilation of the entire Achaean expedition. In the contemporary world, this dynamic is replicated in political conflicts, military planning, and corporate strategy, where leaders prioritize personal eidos over pragmatic action, leading to systemic failure and collective disaster. Homer provides the timeless blueprint for this leadership flaw. Furthermore, Achilles' dilemma, the choice between the long, obscure life and the short, glorious one, remains the fundamental question of legacy and achievement. We live in a world obsessed with fame and impact. The pursuit of Kleos through extreme dedication, constant visibility, and often personal sacrifice defines modern celebrity and professional excellence. The Iliad challenges us to ask if the cost of that pursuit is worth the potential reward. Does a monumental achievement justify the emotional devastation, the alienation, and the ultimate sacrifice of life's simpler joys, such as family and peace? Hector, the man who prioritizes eidos, duty and shame avoidance, and his family over singular fame, presents the moral counterargument to Achilles' all-consuming ambition. Perhaps the most crucial contemporary insight lies in the power of empathy and reconciliation. The final, fragile peace achieved by Achilles and Priam is the epic's ultimate ethical statement. By meeting as two grieving fathers, they strip away the labels of Greek and Trojan, killer and victim, and recognize their shared vulnerability as mortals. This humanization of the enemy, achieved through shared sorrow, stands as a model for resolving cycles of violence in any age. It suggests that true strength is not found in the ability to kill or dominate, but in the capacity to recognize one's own pain in the face of the enemy. It is the moment when the epic transcends the barbaric dictates of the heroic code. The Iliad holds a central and unassailable position in Western thought. Philosophically, it provided the raw material for centuries of debate. Even Plato, while famously criticizing Homer for depicting gods and heroes as morally flawed, arguing that such art corrupts the youth, acknowledged the absolute authority of the poet over Greek life. The epic forced subsequent thinkers to grapple with the nature of justice, the source of human suffering, and the role of passion in moral action. Literarily, the Iliad established the genre of the epic, the use of extended metaphor, the structure of the tragic hero, and the concept of a narrative that is both monumental in scale and deeply personal in focus. Its influence is visible everywhere, from Shakespeare's tragic heroes driven by passion to the modern geopolitical narratives that still invoke the mythic struggle for land, honor, and destiny. Its enduring popularity rests on its brutal honesty. It neither glorifies war uncritically nor offers easy answers. It presents war in its full duality, the chance for immortal glory side by side with the inevitable raw carnage of death and loss. This ambivalence ensures that every generation can read the Iliad and find a reflection of its own conflicts and moral dilemmas. In summary, Homer's The Iliad is a timeless study of the destructive nature of unchecked wrath, Menes. The entire plot revolves around this single emotion, tracing its path from pride-driven isolation Book 1 through devastating loss Patroclus' death, and culminating in its transformation into a profound, shared compassion Ilios in the final book, Priam's Ransom. The great achievement of the epic is its uncompromising depiction of the heroic code. It shows that while the pursuit of glory, Kleos, is the only path to immortality for mortals, this pursuit is intrinsically tied to mortality and loss. Heroes like Achilles and Hector are tragic figures not because they fail, but because they succeed brilliantly, thereby fulfilling their tragic destiny. The Iliad teaches us that life is short, the gods are petty, and external forces will often dictate our suffering. But true nobility is found in the choices we make within those constraints: the choice to fight for duty, the choice to mourn deeply, and most importantly, the choice to recognize the shared, fragile humanity that unites us, even across the divide of hatred and war. But what lessons can you take away and apply today? Consider these questions. First, when does defending your own honor become destructive pride, threatening the collective well-being of your community or team? Second, what is your Kleos? What short-term actions are you taking to build a legacy, and are you willing to pay the full price for that immortal renown? Third, in moments of deep conflict or disagreement, can you seek out the Priam in your opponent? Can you find the shared human vulnerability that allows for empathy and reconciliation, breaking the cycle of mutual destruction? If you seek to deepen your understanding of this heroic world, we highly recommend exploring Homer's complementary epic, the Odyssey, which focuses on the theme of Nostos, homecoming, and cunning rather than war and wrath. You might also consider Virgil's Aeneid, which reframes the entire Trojan saga through the eyes of the surviving Trojan hero Aeneas, shifting the focus from individual glory to civic duty and the destiny of Rome. Finally, explore the works of the Greek tragedians, particularly Aeschylus and Sophocles, who took the foundational trauma of the Trojan War and explored its devastating generational fallout through plays like the Oresteia. The Iliad is more than a poem. It is the enduring story of how we navigate the thin, fragile line between glory and grief. It is the wisdom of 3,000 years, urging us to choose humanity over hatred. This masterpiece reminds us that the greatest battles are rarely won on the plains of war, but in the quiet, reflective moments when we finally learn to master the terrible, beautiful rage within ourselves.